marks Black History Month. The annual celebration is observed in the United States, Canada, Ireland, the Netherlands and the United Kingdom. It honors people and events in the history of the African diaspora. Joining us in studio to talk more about this is Executive Director of Repositioning Solutions, Baba Buntu. Baba, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Just to give us some context, what is Black History Month and where does it originate from?
Okay. So, as you made a reference to, the concept of having 1 month dedicated specifically to Black history comes from African American communities. Dr. George, I forget his name now. Carter G. Woodson is his name. He actually started Black History Week in the early 1900s. And in 1926, the concept of a week or a month dedicated specifically to history was launched. So then it kind of, from there it grew to many other communities, both within the US and especially in the diaspora. But I think what has been a realization over the years is that the lack of really telling the African story is a global phenomena. And we live on the continent of Africa, but we also suffer from not really getting to know many aspects of African history. So we are not saying that we should have 1 month and deal with African history and then we have 11 where we don't. As a company, Repositioning Solutions, we have Black History Month every single month. But I think we do it during 1 month to also highlight the importance and to really go out and make a huge effort in engaging people in conversations around history, checking, especially with our youth, because I think we have started to position history as something we know is important, but do we really have to talk so much about it? It sounds a bit, and it comes across as a bit boring. So I think those of us who say we know a bit about African history, I think a huge challenge is on us. Can we present this in a way that make, especially our young people, connect with history and see the value of it?
You speak about teaching young people more about Black History Month, but in South Africa, how do we celebrate it?
Okay, so maybe it's not just a celebration. I mean, we come from huge aspects of history that we can celebrate. I mean, for thousands of years, we have been innovators, we are builders of civilizations, and we do talk about that aspect of history as well. But we also have a huge component of our history that is very uncomfortable. It has so much pain, it has so much injustice. It bothers us. We are marked by our history, especially our recent 500 to 1,000 years. So it's that we can't celebrate, but we can commemorate it and we can put it into context. Why? I mean, we just heard on the news clip now talking about unemployment. What is the history of unemployment? How does it connect with the history of injustice? How does it connect with the land? How does it connect with leadership on this continent? So we want to connect these dots and not just talk about history as something that happened in the past. We want to make a huge impact on creating a great history in future. And to do that, we need to understand the history we come from.
And if I can just, come in there, how important is it? I mean, you mentioned something very critical that, young people see it as something that is boring to have to go back to our history and sit and read a book sometimes. But, I mean, others do actually read books and you find that they're quite informed. But for those that do not, feel maybe see the need to read a book, how do you keep it interesting? Okay,
so during the month of February, but actually we do it all across the years. But in this month, we make an extra effort. We connect with different communities, and we always want to highlight, I mean, it's open to everyone, but we really want young people to come in numbers. And what we do, we have a line of speakers. We might show a clip of a documentary. But more than anything, we engage with people. We discuss, we dialogue, we make people also, we encourage people to also talk to their parents, talk to their elders, to find out more about the history, particularly related to their own family. And I think, actually, we need to reposition history as something that everyone can and must be interested in. And this is my experience. I love to talk to young people whose first stance is, I don't need this. I'm trying to get a job, so I'm not really interested in what happened 500 years ago. That's my student. The challenge is on me. How can I make this student change his or her views and understand? Because if I show you a book and say, oh, there's a book about you and your history and everything that represents you, and you say, I'm not interested, that doesn't make sense. You will say, how'd you get that book? Why do you know so much about me? You would want to know that book. So I think it's all about how we present it. So we do workshops, we engage, we have debates, and I think you are right that young people in South Africa over the last 2 years have also had an awakening.
Yes.
People read more, they are more interested in information, and it bothers them that they have gaps in their knowledge of history.
And how then, will it help us, if I can just bring it in here, in terms of our school curriculum, especially even from primary school level, basic education, right up until tertiary education? How do we ensure that, we bring it in to the curriculum somehow? Will that assist with the work that you are doing as well, and not only you, but also a lot of us staying abreast with our history?
Actually, what we need history to be implemented on all levels of society. School definitely should be there too. We don't have a very strong history around the continent, and South Africa being one case, of vast aspects of African history really being told. I know there's revisions happening and there is talk of improvement, but I think we are impatient now. We don't want just improvements and a little bit better. Now we want to go all the way. So we start in our communities, we go out, whether government listens to us or not. But of course that doesn't mean we shouldn't continue the pressure. We need to put serious pressure on our governments and our leaders to really understand the essence of history. If we don't know where we come from, we cannot know how we're going to find out where to go.
And just speaking about that, well, how would you say, or what importance is there for telling an African story through an African voice, through a black voice?
It is so important. I can't even stress it enough. History sits maybe in a particular place for many of us because history seems to have been told so much from outside of us.
Yes.
We have heard about, even the history of colonialism was brought to us through English textbooks, through textbooks written outside of the continent, narratives that often put the people who really created all of these painful experiences, maybe not, it kind of justified it a little bit, or it didn't really go all in. And I think now it's time to tell the story from our experience. History sits completely different when it's spoken by voices of those who have been marked by it, who have experienced it. And we are people who experience history right now. I mean, we are uncomfortable with blackness. We are uncomfortable with talking about race. We are uncomfortable talking about white supremacy. But these are realities that we live with every single day. So how can we allow them to continue to be uncomfortable? How can we allow them to be unspoken? So I think black voices talking about and teaching and owning African history, it's so important. I'm very concerned about children, and I sometimes get the opportunity to engage with children on history. And I'm always so, it really does something to me to see how interested small children, I'm talking like 8, 9, 10-year-old children, are in history. When you tell history, when you tell stories that they can relate to, when you talk about blackness, they have a lot of thoughts and a lot of knowledge about these issues, but we tend to think, it's too difficult for them, it's too complex. We cannot allow that to happen. We need to engage.
And just with the art of storytelling, is it fading away, especially in black society?
I think it is, but I think, we have a lot of young poets and storytellers out there that are helping us to bring it back in a new form. And I think this is very important for me to say as well, that sometimes we think of African tradition and maybe history as well as going back. We're supposed to go forward. So even storytelling is supposed to now be reshaped and maybe be done in ways that we haven't really seen it done before. And some people take offense to that and say, no, this is not how we used to do it in the olden days. Exactly. We're supposed to go forward. History must be told in ways that we haven't done before. We need to create an African modernity, because modernity seems to always only be westernization. And that's a script we can no longer follow.
And, it's a very important aspect of our history to have, to evolve. But in that process of evolving, how do we ensure that we preserve what we know from today, what we know from before? Because we know that preservation also becomes a challenge. Hence, our stories then sometimes get told from an outsider's voice and not our own.
Very important. When we are going to start engaging, we're going to start mid-month and do about 2 to 3 weeks intense workshops in many different areas around Gauteng and Northwest. And we're going to focus on history itself, like African history, examples from African history that we need to know. We're going to focus on methods of struggle. So we're going to look at, for instance, Mama Nandi, Mama Nehanda, Queen Nzinga, very important women in African history that we often just push to the side and don't really talk about the methodology that they applied in struggle. And we're also talking about reparations. which is a topic that I feel is really being pushed very low.
Yes.
And it is because this is about restorative justice, and we need to talk about that. What should freedom look like to us?
Yes.
How do we preserve the history, even if it's a history that we don't want to go back to? How do we tell it in our ways so that the world, and hopefully at the time when this is no longer really the main problem in the world, still will remember it and still will know it in the way we're experiencing it now?
Let's keep our history alive.
Indeed, we have to. It's very important.